Peace and blessings, everyone. Welcome to our Sunday tradition of Soul Healing Satsang. My name is at Soul Yogini SP here on Instagram, otherwise known in person as Stacy Patrice. And I take over the Rebuild Foundation live every single Sunday in order to speak truth and engage in truth with you all about the things that matter to us most. So thank you for tuning in. Thank you for joining. If you've been with me before today, you know that we have themes for every month. And this particular month, I just want to introduce the theme of October in a way that maybe perhaps you've looked at it before, but being able to look at it from a very calm and grounded lens and be able to reap the benefits of what this month may have in store for us. So again, thank you for joining. If this is your first time joining, welcome. Here we not only engage for the hour, but we also engage through the comments, not just in our own individual spaces, but sharing our ideas, sharing what it is we think, what we feel, and how what's being brought up resonates with us or not. So I'm going to start by just kind of setting the tone for this particular month's satsangs. So it's actually a little fluid. It's a little less um, fixed than it's been the last couple of months. So one of the things to be really, really present to is the idea that here with our satsangs, we are paying attention to what's happening in the world, paying attention to the culture, looking at, what is giving us messages, what is giving us cues, and how we feel about all of it. And then also being in a space where we can like really connect around that. So for today, I want to talk about shadows and mirrors. And I know that this is kind of a topic that may be a little challenging for some to grasp, just because it may feel outside of the realm of normality. But this is exactly why I want to talk about it. I want this to become a normal conversation and a normal perception for what it is that we are amongst and what it is that we are doing. So October for me has, it's become one of my favorite months. It carries one of my favorite time periods where we are more connected to the spirits, more connected to the ancestors, more connected to those that may be guiding us and trying to reach us and give us messages. It's also a month where the winds of change begin in most parts of the world. It's a month where we figure out, or I should say it's time of year where the winds of change begin, where we start to figure out, what needs to be changed, what needs to be swept up, taken away from us, and what are the things that really matter that can sit with us and stick with us, and stick to our ribs during this colder time. This is the period where it's a dry season. It's a period where we find that here in the Northern Hemisphere, I should say, we find that this dryness becomes kind of a metaphor for what is actually happening in the world. And it's something very beautiful to pay attention to and watch. But in addition to that, I think October, and not just about, the rituals around, the time of year that we call Halloween in this part of the world, not just that, but there's something really, really special about understanding why all of this is, how all of this is, and why it's important for us to pay attention to now. So as I look at this and I start to think about October, I start to think about this month, the first thing that came up for me was mysteries and mirrors and shadows and magic and all of these things. And so today we're going to just narrow it down as much as we possibly can to talking about shadows and mirrors, which are two very important topics. You will see these two topics play in a multitude of ways in your current life. You will see these two topics play as it relates to the political climate. You'll see these two topics as it relates to possibly your cycles of relationships, your cycles of life. And so I really want to dig into them a bit. And I want this to become an open conversation for everyone to engage with, and not just to, sit and soak it up, but to actually engage. So I'm going to start with a reflection. In the comments, drop what is the theme that you currently or typically experience in this particular month. So I'm going to say the month of October. What is typically the theme of October? What does that usually look like to you in your life? So to answer this, or to answer positively, look back and reflect literally on Can you see a cycle, a pattern, things that happen in October for you? What are the kinds of things that happen? And maybe what are the kinds of things that don't happen in October? But go ahead and drop that in the comments, because in order for us to really come in, we are going to start just by a little short retrospective of like who we are, where we are, what we are, and how those things start to come forward in this particular month. So while you all are doing that, I'll start by telling you about some of the things that really come up for me in October are not just the things I mentioned before, because those are more overarching overall things. But in October, I typically feel like, okay, and I mentioned this on, my channel at one point. It was like, what are the things that warm me from the inside? What are the kinds of things that make me feel really good to myself, by myself, with myself, for myself? What is the inner, treasure that I get to cultivate and play with during this particular time of year? And that may be a question for you to reflect upon. It may be a question for you to, think about and take notice and create something around. But it's the idea of whatever is going on outside in the world, can you find your own space where you can cultivate something really warm and rich for yourself? And then what are the things that have to peel away for that to happen? And what are the kind of things that need to be brought in or called in for that to happen? So not just the idea of home, not just the idea of, retreating. It's not full winter. We're not talking about retreating, but just really like, how do you start to decline into that period of rest that we know is coming, that period of hibernation? And what are the things that we need to add in so that we feel more comfortable in that kind of, back and forth retreating? We come out a little bit and we stay in a little bit. And as things are changing and shifting, we can't consciously expect ourselves to be in the same space and to feel the same that we did in summer and feel the same that we did maybe in the height of July or, another point of the year, maybe at the top of the year. We're in the final quarter of 2020 right now. So as we're looking at this, the majority of the final quarter of 2020 is the autumn season in the Northern Hemisphere and the spring season in the Southern Hemisphere. So what is it about this season? I'm asking you to look at, how does it really relate to how you're closing out 2020? We do hit winter in the Northern Hemisphere before we close out 2020, but this is the predominant season, the predominant mood, if you will. And I want you to think about seasons as moods. The types of things that happen outside give us lots of indicators of what is happening in the world, not with humans and people, but the nature of things, quite literally. So I see down here, this is my birthday month, so I'm always reflecting and resetting. Yeah, it's a beautiful time to do so. Even if it weren't your birthday month, it's a beautiful time to be able to say, okay, whatever is happening with me and whatever I'm feeling, is this going to carry forward with me? So not in your case, not just into your new year, but thinking about like this new season kind of kicks it off for you as well. So that's a beautiful, beautiful share. Thank you for sharing that. So I'm going to start by giving us this topic of shadows. And shadows is one of those conversations, kind of like how we talked about non-attachment a couple of weeks ago. Shadows is often misunderstood, and it's also often something that people can't really pinpoint if they're in it, right? We can pinpoint it by feeling, but it's sometimes hard to describe. So I'm going to talk about shadows a bit, at least from the yogic perspective and the perspective in which I understand it and help people understand it. So shadows is a concept, and it's based in psychology, it's based in philosophy, and it's a concept about how the mind operates and how that connects to and speaks to the rest of your being. So we're talking about multiple dimensions. How do the shadows allow you a space where you are able to feel integrated and whole? That's the question that brings us to the shadows. Like, I don't feel whole. I don't feel like everything is working together. Everything is not a well-oiled machine with me right now. So what might there be at play that's causing this to happen? And the answer for that is definitely about the shadows. When it comes to your shadows, these are the recesses of your mind. These are the places that maybe you're not conscious of. These are the things that perhaps you feel some kind of disconnection with. These are the things that maybe you don't share with other people what is happening. These are the things you might try and hide from those that are close to you, or try and cover, or do a big effort to try and cover these things, because they're not necessarily things that feel good to talk about. And these might be things that have happened to you. These might be experiences. But more often than not, the shadow really does involve the parts of you that definitely are you, that don't really go with the other parts of you. They're typically like the rebel side of you. Some people call it the dark side. It's the side of you that other people are not accustomed to seeing. And then it kind of comes out, or it kind of, spurts out, or there's a big scandal, and then people are going, huh? I never knew this about this person, right? So that's a sign of the shadows. When we see things happening that seem out of character for who someone is and they come out, that is a sign of a shadow. And the shadow is important because just like anything else, we use the metaphor of anything that is sitting in the light. Right now, I'm looking at a tree outside of my window. It is fully illuminated on the top, and the shadows fall under the brush of the tree on the bottom, right? And so think of that metaphorically, like if the shadows are on the ground, if they're on the bottom, on the foundation of this tree, even though we know they're just impressions from the light, they're just places where light is not as bright or not as luminous, then we understand the shadow to mean those parts of ourselves as well. You can see it in nature. Things that have huge dimension and huge dynamic proportions typically cast really hard shadows. So I want you to embrace that about yourself. I want you to embrace that you as a dynamic person has or is able to cast really dark shadows. It doesn't mean that who you are is somehow in conflict with who you've been. That doesn't have to be the case, but who you are brings those shadows with you, whether you approve of it or not. It's just a matter of who can see them and who you allow to see them before they come out where they are in broad daylight where everyone can see them. So the reason that shadows and the idea of shadows is super important is because if you are not aware and you are not claiming and owning the aspect of yourself that may be a little shady or a little dark, or your dark side, or the part of you that doesn't agree and is not always happy, cheery, and light, that's completely fine. But let's not condemn the dark side. Let's not get to the point where we start to say the dark side is bad, or the part of me that is not necessarily the more popular and agreeable part of me is somehow something I should be ashamed about or feel bad about. That's not what this conversation is about. So when we talk about the shadows, we're actually talking about the parts of ourselves that are there and are going to be there whether we like it or not, because we will have experiences where we didn't rise to the occasion the way we hoped to rise to the occasion. We will have experiences where we did things that we regret or feel bad about in some case. And we will definitely have instances where we have things that have been done to us that we haven't really fully unpacked or dealt with. So when we talk about shadows, we're talking about an entire spectrum. We're not just talking about the part of you promote, right? So I hope that's clear. So when we think about shadows, we think about the parts of us that are less present and less illuminated than the other aspects of us. So when we think about the part that everyone sees, that's the shining bright person, that's the persona, that's the person we know people will be comfortable with. Sometimes we call that the representative. Sometimes we call that the seeker, the person who's seeking more consciousness, more light. Sometimes we call that person the kind of person who is the front person, the facade. We call that particular aspect of ourselves the persona. That's who's in front. That's who's going to meet people. That's who's going to greet people. That's who's going to agree or disagree to do things publicly. But when we start to talk about the shadows, this is the part of ourselves, and I'm going to call it part of ourselves. We're not going to, disassociate it. This is the part of ourselves that we don't think people will accept. We think perhaps this part of ourselves will cost us the kind of love we want. We think this part of ourselves will in some way embarrass the other aspect we worked really hard to polish up and maintain. We think this aspect of ourselves could be illegal. This aspect of ourselves could be, criminal in some instance. This part of ourselves is a very private part, but it's not necessarily the part of ourselves that we show to everyone else. And so when we talk about the shadows, this is nothing to be ashamed of. I'll say that again. Your shadows are the colors in a darker tone, so to speak, that make up your entire palette. So we're not talking about shadows as something that we want to get rid of. We're talking about something we want to transform. All right. And it's not a contest of how quickly you transform your shadows. A lot of times it takes a lot of time to transform your shadows because they are the more repressed part of self. They are the part of self that we tuck away. So we don't get a chance to give it a lot of light. We don't get a chance to share it openly and get people's opinions on it and see what they think about it and have them look at it and say, hey, is everything okay? A lot of times we condemn that part. So in our work, it's important to do what they call shadow work so that you can start to look at the aspects of yourself that may not be as lovable, as agreeable, and you can start loving on them. And some people may say, how am I going to love on a part of myself that's not lovable to anybody else? Here's why, and here's how. You can love on your shadow self because you understand that is also you. When you disassociate from your shadow self, you are saying that's not you. And that is what causes a multitude of problems. This takes time and maturity. It's not something that's overnight. But your shadow self, or the part of you that is not seen or illuminated to everyone, is often the part of yourself that seeks integration. It seeks to be a part of your life. It's like that child that feels like all the other siblings or everyone else is getting more shine. And if you keep giving everyone more shine, I'm going to act up so that I'm in a position where you pay attention to me too. And this is what happens in the case of scandals. This is what happens in the case of surprise behavior, right? And so, and deviant behavior, as people call it. So what we're going to talk about today is that there are people who really function in their shadow and they don't let light in. And there are people who really function in their light and they don't let shadow in. Again, as usual, we're looking for that space in between where we can accept the really light, bright part of ourselves, the luminous part of ourselves. And we can also accept the shadow part of ourselves. Like, hey, this happened. I went through this, and there's no way I could be here, even know what the light feels like, how to let it in, or how much of it needs to be shown if I had not been through this shadow aspect of myself, right? So this is starting to connect the recesses with the front part, right? So the front part is completely visible and seen and can be seen by anyone. And the shadows have to be seen usually either by your permission, by your vulnerability, by your express consent if you're hiding them, or they surprise pop out when you're not expecting it because you no longer can press it down and hold it in. And something triggered it and provoked it and it came out. Why is this important to talk about in October? Well, we're already experiencing it. We just started. We're already seeing some of these deep shadows. We're already seeing places where we're like, okay, this is not what I thought it would be. This is not the way I would like it to be. Why is something that's not great or not good being promoted? Why is it in the forefront? How is it in the forefront? And we've been seeing this for some time, but October is usually when these things come to a head. It's when the truth comes flying out, whether we like it or not. It's when we start to see ourselves in a new light, and change happens quite swiftly, because once these things start coming out, you are met with a crossroads and a decision of whether I'm going to try and continue to conceal and lie or any of those things that are outside of integrity, or whether I'm going to come forward and just say it like it is and use this as an opportunity to open a conversation. And so not only is this the month where a lot of political actions happen, but this is also a month where a lot of our own personal feelings, ideas, and hidden behaviors start to come into question. So that's the first part about shadows. While you all are listening, if you want to drop in the comments, so what are some of the shadows you believe you're seeing right now in whatever climate, your personal life, in your relationship with your family. Maybe it's something you see about yourself. Maybe it's something you see, in the external world and all that's happening in our world. But go ahead and share in the comment, identify some of the shadows that you see, some of those things that are like under the surface that we're starting to see peek up from the surface just a tad bit at this time, okay? And I'll keep going and I'll come back and check your comments in a minute. So that is what happens. We are asked to be more present and to see what are the things that are happening that are trying to peek out and get our attention, right? The opposite of this side. So we have shadows, and I shouldn't say the opposite, but the opportunity of the shadows are the mirrors, okay? So when we talk about mirrors, we're talking about the parts of ourselves that we can see in other people. They always say when something nags you to no end, when you can't stand how someone is behaving, when someone irks you, you've never even met them, when something happens that just drives you insane and you don't know why, this is part of your shadow work. This is part of the thing that you haven't given enough light that's happening, that's going on with you. And then when you see it in the world, you are confronted with your own belief system, your own truth, and defending, in many cases, defending your own boundaries, right? So a lot of the things that we see other people do, the reason we're watching is not because it's so fascinating to watch other people, but it's a lot of fascination involved with us understanding that what other people are doing are sometimes what it is that we need to be doing. What they are showing us is our need to correct that behavior in ourselves, or to examine or explore that behavior in ourselves, explore that belief system, explore that thought within, so that we feel a little more comfortable when we decide to speak out, or when we decide to, stick to our work and do these things. So mirrors, on the other hand, is when we are shown something so clear we can't ignore it. When other people or situations or things show back to us what we haven't dealt with, what we haven't worked on, what is there still left for us to look at. So I remember saying on one of the first Sat Sangs back in March or April, I said, whenever there is a pandemic, whenever there is something that in mass we are all responsible for encountering and dealing with, there is a large collective message to us as humans. And so some of the things that came up during this time is not just the actual thing that was happening, but the behavior of, where is our society already sick? Not what is the illness that's being talked about, perpetuated, and is running rampant. What is the illness that we as a society, or as a culture, or as a structure already have? And so that doesn't mean me personally, I can say everyone is going through the same thing as I'm going through. That means, when I look at us as a group of humans, maybe it's something like, this shines the light on the fact that we never had adequate health care in place, or this shines light on the fact that we need to be taking better care of ourselves at all times, or this shines light on the fact that we procrastinate and wait for something to happen to react, instead of proactively doing things all along and keeping up with that no matter what the external world is showing. So these are the kind of things we start to see. These are mirrors. They don't have to be people. They can be circumstances. They can be things that show up that put you in a situation where either you feel fearful or you feel uncertain. And so when people talk about these uncertain times that they've been talking about, they're actually quite certain. They've been certain, right? Like the idea that we never really prepared for something like this is the certainty that we would feel this way when something like this happens, right? So this is the idea, is that whatever's going on can be a mirror for what needs to happen with us. So it's not always an exact mirror like, okay, people over there are going wild, that must mean I'm going wild. It's not literal in that way. It's creative in the sense that when you see something happening and it bothers you, or it's speaking directly to you, you don't make an assumption that it's talking to everyone else the same way. You make a correction or make a note with yourself. This is something I need to look deeper into because it seems to be showing up everywhere around me. So now I'm talking more about the interpersonal mirrors. I'm talking about your relationships, the people in your family, your coworkers, the people you speak with all the time. If you find a theme and everyone's saying it to you, no matter how encouraging or embarrassing that may be, then there is typically something in the shadows that you haven't given enough time, space, or attention to. And it is trying to peek out and get your attention. And why does it want your attention? It wants your attention because whatever it is that is happening inside internally is something that realistically feels non-connected. It feels disconnected. So if we look at ourselves as holistic people, how much work do we have to do until all of these parts start talking to each other, until all these parts of ourselves are in connection and speaking together and working together? How long until we feel like a well-oiled machine? How much more until we feel complete and fulfilled in our day-to-day walk? How many times do we have to bump into something before we take heed to it and use it as a message for our own clarity? This is what shadow work is about, and this is how it shows up when we're not engaged in it, or sometimes this is what initiates engagement into it, right? So think about this. If and you all can drop those certain things that show up that let you know, man, I have so much more that I need to do, because every time I go through this, this is what I am met with. This is how I'm responding. And so I'll share a story that I was actually talking with my love about earlier. And this story is about what happened when I used to be a runway model here in Chicago. And just there was a mindset that I had. And this mindset that I had about who I was, it was unbreakable. It was simply, this is how I feel. This is who I am. This is how I was raised. This is what I know about myself, even outside of anyone raising me or telling me. There are some things I know for myself. This was my soul speak with myself, right? And then I thrust myself into an industry that constantly wants to shape and contour and contort your image to fit whatever the message is of the people who run the industry, right? And so it was this constant, everything has to be very young, everything has to be very small, everything has to be almost incredibly undersized. Everything, you can't be big in this industry unless you're going along with the way other people define that bigness to you. And although I love modeling and it's one of my favorite things to do because it's just so much personality and expression involved, this was not a time when I finally had agents. This was not a time where I really wanted to encounter people telling me I wasn't enough of this or wasn't enough of that, or I have to be more of this, or I won't get gigs until I'm more of that. And so what ended up happening is the part of me that knew better, the part of me that was very secure was like, we'll find out. And we did. We found out that I was correct. We found out that there were people who felt just like the people who felt they were correct. And there was not a tug of war with this with me. It was just, this is where I stand. And if this is not good enough as I'm standing, this probably won't work out. And so what I then decided to do was start with photography because I wanted to control the images. I wanted people to be able to look like themselves. I wanted the ability for people to see themselves just how they were without having to fit in this box. I actually wanted people to see themselves more beautiful than they ever imagined could be captured on camera. Like, you know how you get dressed and you have on that cute outfit, you have that moment. And before we had selfies and all of this, there was nobody to capture it. And you're like, man, I need somebody to see me today. I'm cute, right? And there was no record of it anywhere. Well, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about, let's make a record. Let's make an intentional record of that. Let's create you beautiful in the way we all know you are right here, right now. And you have a say in it. And let's build it. Let's see what happens. And so that became something I love doing. The reason I'm sharing this is because the shadows that were involved when I was a model, they weren't shadows of my insecurities, but they were, how bad do I want this that I'm going to try and fit and adjust myself to what they're looking for? And then it occurred to me, it was like, so I'm a model, whether I have an agent or not. I am a creator, whether there is a head over me or not. I am someone who is expressive, whether I get paid for it or not. I'm stylish when I leave my house, whether I'm getting on a runway or not. What started to come was, so if you are all of these things already, then of course you would have a problem with having to meet other people's validation of the things you have already validated for yourself. And so those particular parts of me that wanted to battle with, that wanted to go against, that wanted to pave the way, that wanted to say, hey, that's not fair, those parts of me were challenged on a regular basis. But what I started to see as a bigger mirror is, we need more people on this side of things, and maybe that will create the ability for more people like myself to be on that side of things, if that makes sense, y'all. Like, we might need more people who are controlling the ideas and the images to crop up first, so that there can be more people on the other side. It can't just be left or right. Sometimes we have to spread ourselves around and move around in a different way. So what I'm saying with that is, your shadows, the things that you don't want to talk about, the things that, come up for you, the things that you feel, if you felt like an outlier or an outcast and those things come up again, they might be things you haven't given enough time to. And so then what you start to do is say, okay, if in fact I am feeling that way, can I do something? Can I step in some way to create more space and more clarity, more opportunity, more flexibility, more leverage for others once I understand it for myself? Okay. So shadows and mirrors, those people were mirrors for me to really get into the space where I belong. They were not supposed to, I wasn't supposed to take that personal like it was an attack on me. It was giving me a picture that I was looking right at the whole time. And I never imagined myself commandeering the space in the way that I did later. And because mainly those of you who are here are artists and creatives and just people who are wildly, insanely dynamic with your talents and skills, I know this is something you relate to. I know this is something that you've been through or perhaps are currently going through as you're trying to evaluate how much energy, time, and space you should give to what it is that you're doing. So, how do shadows and mirrors relate to our day-to-day lives? Not trying to create a movement, not trying to save the world. How does it relate to how we function and show up every day? All right, so every day, imagine that shadows are about presence, how present you are, how current you are in the moment, how much you can be here now, how much you've moved out of your space so that you can be here and hear what's coming to you. So shadows are that part of you that want to emerge, and mirrors are the part of you that give the messages for your emergence. Okay, so shadows are the part of you that wish to emerge, and mirrors are the part of you that give the messages for your emergence. So when I say emergence, I'm simply talking about growth. I'm talking about the ability to grow wildly and fluidly and open up to yourself in the world. So this has nothing to do with the occupation or other people. To grow wildly, fluidly, and open yourself up to yourself in the world, okay? So your shadows being in the recesses become more present when you need to pay attention to them. Sometimes they can sit back there for a long time and it doesn't bother anyone. Some people go to the grave with the things that they never want to talk about, never want to look at. Some people completely spend their entire life trying to avoid and create a new life around the things they don't want to look at, right? So if this is happening, then who's tending to those hard cast, strong, finite, dark shadows? And the answer is you are, because it's taking up space. It's restricting your bandwidth. You can't hear, you can't see. Your belief systems are all wound up in it. You're understanding the world without explaining or communicating. So you're like this, like you're all twisted up, eagle arms, all twisted up in these shadows. So as you're twisted up in these shadows, people who are around you don't have a real good grip and sense of who you actually are, because you've already disowned the part of you you don't want to deal with. You haven't brought it in. And the reason you haven't brought it in is great reasons. These are not like fantasy reasons. A lot of times they haven't come in because you don't feel supported. You might feel fearful. You might have anxiety. You may feel like you're going to recall too much or drum up too much, or it's too much of a Pandora's box to get started. But again, I repeat, shadow work starts slow. It's not a quick hit and go. It's a slow burn. It's like that slow fire that you built yourself, and you're going to sit there and observe it until it is done burning or until it's time to put it out, right? So your shadow work has that ability to come slow, show you quickly, but come slow in the resolution of it, come slow in the integration of it, and come slow in the understanding of all that was wound up in it. It's not a quick thing. Right? So we utilize what is happening that we can see, that is illuminated, those mirrors that we can see so clearly, as ways to give us indications about what's there in the shadows. All right, so I want to know if you all have any questions about this, if you have any comments about that, please drop them in the comments. There's not a whole lot more to say about that, except that this is October. This is a month where these things become more pronounced. And here's one of the reasons why. Sometimes these shadows and mirrors become more pronounced because there's another element that maybe we're not used to paying attention to, and that's the spirit element. And I'm not going to get too deep into talking about all of the nuances that exist with that, because there are plenty. But a lot of times the spirit element is what can make some of these shadows and mirrors more emergent, or make them more confusing, more urgent for you to pay attention to at this time. And so when we start to think about all the things that are happening in the world, and we start to think about all the things that are happening within, and we start to think about them together, we realize there's a whole lot more there than maybe what we have selectively paid attention to, more than what we have selectively decided is going to be our focus. And so what we're tasked to do is to not only recognize that shadows are not just necessarily things you've created. They might be things you psychically feel. They might be things you've inherited. They might be things you've dreamt about or gotten messages about. before or previously. There may be things that happened to you that you never got rid of. So let's start to talk about that in the comments. What are some of your shadows? Yeah, excuse me. I like that comment, like trying to ignore a mosquito stuck in the same room. Yeah, so it's going to find something to eat. It needs to exist. It needs to find something to eat, something to feast on. And you are like the largest, most attractive hunk of meat there is, right? So, and it's going to buzz, it's going to come around, and you know it's there, and you can try and ignore it. But that doesn't at all change the idea that is happening, or that is there, or that is something that you'll be faced with, right? And to me, that's kind of how shadows are. They're the elephant in the room. Sometimes your friends and family already know about your shadows, and they're not saying anything to you about it because it may be a sensitive spot. But sometimes they know. Sometimes they're like, this is what's going on with this person, and we just let this ride because we know this person is going through yada, 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 and we don't want to make waves. We don't want to rock the boat. They had a hard time. Sometimes it's done like almost in lightweight avoidance, enabling, and pity, right? And then other times people do it in pure compassion. They don't bring it up. They don't want to talk about it, but they say, hey, let me know what you need. Let me know how I can be a support to you. I'm here. Or they might just come over and help you and hug you and support you and be there for you and all of these things. So there's this idea that there's a lot of ways to support people through their shadows, because we know individually, it happens to all of us. We know this is not easy work. We know this is necessary work. We know that a lot of the changes we want to see are not going to be spearheaded by people who know less about how horrible it feels than we do. We know that if we have a very strong inclination or opposition towards something, perhaps we need to be the one to step in and do something. We also know that in order to create change, we have to get it for ourselves. It doesn't come from outside of ourselves. So if it's something about us we're not feeling, we can't then go try and fix it in everybody else so we feel better about ourselves. We have to actually do that. And we have to actually see the results a lot of times, that once we start doing the work, we start seeing things change in small tones and colors. And that the color of things, I'm speaking metaphorically about colors, but temperature, idea of feeling, that as things start to change metaphorically in colors, our mood, our experiences, our flow also start to change. And we can just use the seasons as an illustration of that. We know that when the skies get a little stormy, there's a different weather upon us. We know that when the trees have leaves that start falling, start changing colors, that it's about to get cold, the temperature is about to drop. And we know all of these things because we've seen them repeatedly. We've been in weather enough to know certain changes signal certain upcoming attractions. The same happens with our shadow work. We know the more work we do, when we encounter that thing we didn't love before, we encounter it again, we have a different response. And we have a different kind of reaction to it. Maybe we don't react at all, we just respond in kind. So that is also important. It's not just about changing yourself. This is not just about self-improvement. I just want to change myself until I'm perfect, because we know that doesn't exist. You're already perfect, right? We know that growth is perfect. We know that the intersections in which we encounter the parts of ourselves that we don't have a lot of love for because of whatever's happened deserve a bit more love. And I always tell my clients and people that, the thing that really bothers you, that you think is going to embarrass you the most if people find out, the thing that you think people will not accept about you in this day and age, is often the thing that liberates the heck out of you. Because as soon as you decide you are not going to be a victim to it, as soon as you decide that it doesn't have any kind of reign over you, and you start to share it, you realize how many other people were in that same kind of hell with you, trying to avoid talking about it. And so in our culture now, we see more people talking about it. We see more people saying, I won't do this anymore. I'm no longer doing that. We see it with parenting. We see it with the kind and formation of relationships. We see it with how people work, what kind of work they do, what titles they give themselves, what kind of creative power they can envision. We see it with the relations between people who are different than us. We see it especially in this period of can't go here, can't go there, have to do this in order to do that. This may change, this did change. We see ourselves adjusting and being flexible in those encounters. And so the question then becomes to you, how is it that you can give more light and more attention to things that have been in the dark. And a lot of people automatically would say, well, I thought if we focused on things that were negative or bad, that would make them bigger. And it's like, this is not about focusing on the thing that happened, like a historical point of view. This is about giving more light to that point of view. It's about giving more energy to that point of view, if that makes sense. You want to give more light to whatever's happening, whatever has happened. You want it to have the light of day. You want to give it space to breathe. Give it space to breathe. What can we understand about this that gives us the opportunity to get more from it? So I see a comment here. I have been breaking down generational realities that are not mine, becoming more of my truth, calling myself out on the things that I see. I have been breaking down generational realities that are not mine, becoming more of my truth, calling myself out on the things that I see. Absolutely. So to that, and thanks for that comment, Tiffany, to that, yeah, we have a ton of those. We have a ton of those. We have a ton of those kinds of things that, hold space, keep up space. And we hadn't necessarily identified where it came from or where it's coming from. Is it pausing? You all are saying it's pausing? Let me see. I'm going to draw it a little closer to me and then let me know if it's still pausing now, because everything is showing okay on my end. But if it says it's pausing for you all are what matters. So we were deep in. It did not save. It would not allow me to save it. It would not allow me to post it. So we were deep in. So hopefully if that was of interest to you, you got it, you grabbed it, it's gone. All right. And this is part of what happens. You have to remain non-attached, because at the end of the day, what it is that's going on, what it is that's happening is happening in its own way. Don't have full control over it, but keep rolling, right? So we were talking about shadows and mirrors. If it starts pausing again, please let me know, because I didn't get the indication until much later than 2 or 3 of the comments that told me it was pausing. So we were talking about shadows and mirrors, and the comment I was reading, Tiffany's comment, was about just starting to remove voices that have been passed down for generations as being her truth, starting to, kind of intersplice some of her current truth as she understands it into the conversation that's been a generational conversation. It's pausing again? My goodness. I am not sure. I hope this doesn't keep happening. I don't know what else to say. I'm rolling over here. But thank you for the heads up. So I'll just say in this end piece, and yeah, say it again. These shadows ain't trying to be seen, right? Like, and it's a very delicate thing, because even if I wanted to talk about it more, there's just not more about it to say. What I said was pretty much the long and short of it, is that it's our individual work that gives it texture. It's our individual attention that gives it more space to be seen and understood. It's not necessarily that there's so much to get or so much to understand. It's that within our own lives, within our own lives, there is a lot to be seen. So we just have to use the information and allow, these shadows in our personal lives to be addressed and to be paid attention to. And that's what it is we have to do. So and in the event that this cuts again, I just wanted to ask you all, if anyone who is still on the call, if there was something that you had experienced or any questions you have about shadow and the mirrors as it relates to your everyday practical life, because that is important to pay attention to, how it relates to your everyday practical life in the way that you live as you move through the world. Is there something about shadows and mirrors as our introductory topic for October that you are paying attention to and starting to see and understand in a different light? And if you are, go ahead, drop that in the comments. Tiffany, I just readdressed your comment. And yes, a lot of times we do have to use our current truth in order to slice through some of what helped other people during their time. May not always be the same medicine that has the same strength and potency in our time. And so it is something to adjust and to definitely make customize for what it is that we feel, what we've experienced, and what we're going through. Okay. So I would say from here, a few tips on how to do this in your everyday life if you're not certain. When it comes to shadow work, I do a lot of my shadow work in observation and then in writing and deep surveying of my inner understanding, my inner landscape, my inner conversation. I do a ton of paying attention to that because I think when you have things that you know other people don't know about, or when things come up that you didn't even know were still there, the best person to review those through first is often yourself, because you will handle the material in a way that is delicate and in a way that has a sense of inner strength. So as you're talking about these things and feeling these things in your life, it's like, why do I feel this way? Where did this thought come from, perhaps? And can I recall from the feeling, not from the idea of what happened, but can I recall from the feeling where this has happened before? And sometimes it's the feeling that guides us out of the shadow. It's not necessarily someone else shining a light on it and saying, this is what it is. It's how we feel about it that reminds us and tells us, okay, this is what happened. This is how I was encountering this before. And and then the mirrors are just additional confirmation. They're just parts of ourselves that we see, and they reflect back to us something we learned or decided to do. So something happened recently where someone I know was treating someone else that I love, someone I know and love, was treating someone else that I know and love with a very strong um, aversion. You know, they were like, just kind of speaking about them as if they had no compassion for their situation. And I had a lot of compassion for this situation. And that mirror was the moment of, oh, this is what happens when this person acts this way towards me. I remember this feeling. So I'm not just protective of this new person I love. I'm also protective of the part of me that had to heal from not being loved this way by the first person. Being able to just see that how it is I am gives me information about how other people might be moving through things, and also gives me a lot of information about why it was such a challenge for me if I can actually see the source that it came from. So that is something too that feels a little bit different. Um, and I think it's ultra important to be in a position where you constantly are looking for that connection, not just waiting for it, but not just waiting until it blows up your spot, but constantly looking when something feels off, when something feels weird, looking for the place where it may connect to something. And that can be in your home or, the political climate or any other environment. What does my first mind tell me? What does my first gut tell me? What does my inner wisdom on my path tell me? No, it might not be the correct answer because it's all speculation if other people are involved and I haven't asked them and I'm not a part of their process, but it may give me enough information for me to come together about how I feel about it and how I want to work with it. And so that's what I'll say about that. Yeah, and sometimes people reflect back to you ways that you felt that you forgot you had to heal from. That's always a wonderful feeling, is when somebody shows you, I remember I used to be insecure like that. I remember I used to be paranoid like that. I remember I used to feel unloving towards people for no reason and just be selfish like that. When you start to see that behavior, it puts you in a place of like, wow, this is where compassion comes from, because now someone else is going through it. And because I know we all go through our things, I can't be as judgmental toward them as I might at first instinct think I can be, because I won't allow myself to judge someone as harshly when it's part of my path. As sometimes we experience it to get to the compassion. We experience to get to the softness. We experience to get to the place in ourselves where we understand and have compassion for things. And so when it shows up again, that's our opportunity to not only see how much we've healed, but to see if more light needs to be shed. Because some of us heal in a particular way and then still treat other people the same way that we were once hurt. Or we're not healed, and that's why we treat other people the same way once we were once hurt. And so it becomes a kind of, back and forth on that. So any questions about shadows or mirrors in the comments? Otherwise, I'm gonna go ahead and close out. We had a little shaky patch here. I didn't know it was pausing, so I apologize for that. And I'm not sure why it was, because it wasn't pausing on my end, but I definitely don't want to beat the nail all the way into the wood. I think you guys got a good grip and a good grasp of what we were talking about as far as shadows and mirrors. And I think that's something that you can start to work and look at in your personal life. And you can choose how to deal with it. Some people deal with their shadows in therapy, in counseling. Some people talk with their partners. Some people write and isolate themselves, connect to nature. Some people go on trips to meet other people who don't have belief systems and preconceived notions that they're aware of about who they are and how they're showing up. And some people decide to withdraw and retreat, which is always a great idea. If you're feeling like you're working on something, you need to give yourself a bit more time. And that's like the long and short of it is you have to give yourself time. You must give yourself time. So for the month of October, we'll continue to talk. I believe I'm going to bring some guests in at some point because I really want to have live conversations where we talk and connect. And that is not, just in the comments. I want voices heard and opinions shared. So we talked about shadows and mirrors today as a kind of introduction to October. We'll move forward about mysteries, moods, and magic, how to use the force, how to be deeper into your understanding of your own nature, and ways in which you can be assisted and supported in that. And as we move through the month, we will definitely move through a couple of these topics so that come November, everyone has a foundation to stand upon, because I believe we'll all need a stronger foundation. So thank you all so much for joining. Thank you so much. I'm gonna close out, and I appreciate your shares. I appreciate your alerts and joining the conversation. And I'll see you next Sunday at 1 p.m. here on the Rebuild channel. Thank you all so much. Have a beautiful week. Peace.